자, 이제 단상이 어느 정도 정리가 된 것 같은데요. 그럼 지금부터는 저희 첫 번째 세션을 본격적으로 시작해 보도록 하죠. 우리 마이스 산업의 미래에 대해서 이야기를 나눌 때 빠뜨릴 수 없는 주제가 바로 하나 있습니다. 우리 인재에 대한 이야기일 텐데요. 이 우수한 인재에게 마이스의 매력을 어떻게 하면 어필할 수 있을까? 그리고 우수 인재들을 어떻게 확보할 수 있을까? 아마 오늘 이 자리에 함께하고 계신 분들이라면 같은 고민들 하고 계실 것 같습니다. 이어지는 세션에서 함께 짚어보시죠. 자, 첫 번째 세션은 인재 보유 그리고 확보라는 주제로 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 단상으로 모시겠습니다. 아비나시 찬다라나 MCI 그룹 글로벌 교육 이사님께서 발표로 열어주시겠습니다. So could you please come up to the stage? 여러분 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So, we've just heard from our esteemed panelists and speakers a lot about the marketplace, all about trends and what's happening in the world and also in this region. When we go external, that's one thing. But for all of you as business owners within the mice industry, we have to also think about the workplace, not just the marketplace. So when we think about the context and the challenges that we're facing in our industry, there are a lot of things that we have to consider. First of all, if we look at the context, many of you have heard now for a long time this particular phrase called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in our world, there was no greater time to experience a VUCA world as we did during the pandemic. And it really challenged every single one of us as human beings, but also as businesses. The other element, if you have heard of VUCA before, that you might not have heard of, that's challenging us, is this concept of hyper-connectivity. We are living in a world where we are all connected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year. And it's becoming overwhelming. And information is traveling faster than ever before at light speed. If you think about the greater context of the environment that we're facing as businesses, as an industry, there are many things that affect us that we don't even realize sometimes that's happening to us, and therefore affecting not just the marketplace, but also what's happening internally in our organizations. So the trends, and there are many of them, as you can see right here on the screen. Yes, of course, the future of work continues to change, and it's probably changed quicker than ever before. We know about climate change, and that continues to be a great challenge for all of us. We talked about a stalled global economy, although indeed, in the mice industry, we're very fortunate that business is bouncing back. And yes, we're very fortunate that there is the return of mice based on all the data and statistics and the volume of business that's coming in today. We have challenges of cost of living, fueled by rising inflation and debt. We have geopolitical issues. We have issues around data privacy and security. We have challenges of trust. And are we trusted anymore as we used to be? And also, and I think it was mentioned earlier by the panel before, we have changing consumer habits and needs. Our customers are evolving in terms of their expectations. Now, I'm starting off with a bigger picture because oftentimes when we think about talent and we think about human resources, we don't think about everything else that's influencing and impacting them in terms of why they should join our industry, why they should join your organization, and why they should stay in the organization. This bigger context is extremely important, as you think about your human resources strategy and how each of these trends and many others are impacting acquisition, but also the retention of your talent. And indeed, the complexity and the challenge that we face as an industry and as your individual businesses has accelerated faster than our ability to adapt to that change. Think about that. This complexity and this challenge has accelerated faster and will continue to do so, especially when we think about trends like artificial intelligence and what that's going to do, as it's already doing today, as it will continue to do in the future. How are you, as organizations, how are we as a sector adapting to that change? And how quickly are we able to respond? Because as Senthil said it earlier on, it's also about all business models. Are they relevant today? And that applies also in terms of your human resources models and frameworks. How relevant is that today, and it will be in the future? It's a question that you must ask yourself. And in terms of our industry in general, yes, let's look at those challenges. We know there is a lack of talent availability. The war for talent is real. But let me tell you something. I have been in this industry for 25 years. This May, it's been 25 years. I spent 10 years as head of human resources for one of the offices of MCI, where I work. And I spent 15 years heading up learning and development. So for 25 years, my day-to-day job is dealing with people. But what's interesting is in 1998, when I started, McKinsey had a headline saying, "The war for talent is real," in 1998. It was just a different context. And so today, the war for talent is real. But what solutions do we have to try and tackle that? We know there are high costs of attrition and turnover. Let me give you an example. Did you know that for every person you lose, there is a cost to replace them? But the question is, do you know how much that costs? The research shows on average that a junior person might cost as much as an annual salary. So if the average annual salary happens to be, for example, 37 million per year, if you lose that person, the potential cost to replace them will be exactly the same. If it's a manager or a director, it can double. So this has an impact on your retention strategy if you understand the cost of losing those people. But the challenge is, it's not in your profit and loss statement. Therefore, you don't think about that cost. So retention becomes even more crucial when you understand the cost to the business. The other one is lack of employee engagement. Engagement was mentioned earlier on by the panel from a business context, engaging customers. But what about engaging your employees? What is your strategy? Gallup has done a survey over many years as a research organization, and they've calculated that the lack of engagement could cost around 30% of an annual salary. 30% if your employee is disengaged. And they calculated that only between 20 and 23% of employees are engaged at any one time. Many of them are disengaged. And therefore, there's a massive loss of productivity. Last year, it was estimated that loss of productivity was valued in the US market at 7.2 trillion US dollars. Lack of engagement. What does that do in terms of how your employees are? Therefore, once you've got your employees, if they're disengaged, what is that doing in terms of the customer experience? Because there is a correlation between employee engagement and experience with customer experience. The workplace has changed rapidly, more than ever before, because, as we know why, the pandemic accelerated that change. The expectations are also changing, also because we have different generations that are now working in the workplace. 4 different generations are working side by side right now. It's estimated sometimes there's even 5, but at least 4. And each one has a different set of expectations, although there are some common ones. And indeed, that is the whole concept of the demographic shift. Here in Korea, I don't know all the statistics, but yes, the population is aging. Yes, there are fewer children being born based on the research. People are staying longer in work because they cannot afford to retire, or maybe they don't have a sufficient pension. And when we put that into perspective, think about this. The average career now is between 40 and 50 years because we are living longer. The median time we spend in any one job, yes, indeed, this might not be here for Korea, but this is obviously general research that's been done, is 4.1 years. That was back in 2022. Now, what does that mean? Think about this for a second. It means a person might have up to 10 different jobs in their career. The whole time when we spent, like people like me, 25 years in the same organization is no longer true. I'm proud to have been 25 years. That's because I'm an entrepreneur. I created the jobs. Therefore, it feels like it's always new. I think like a startup within the same organization. But that's because the organization has created the environment for me to think and behave and act in that way. So I don't have to feel like changing organizations. That's tiring. You have to start all over again. It doesn't mean to say your employees want to leave, but are they triggered or influenced to leave depending on the experience that you create, which we will talk about shortly. So why does talent acquisition and retention matter to us? Well, you see there's 4 points. It helps us grow. That's a simple, of course, that's a simple comment, isn't it? We talked about growth here as a sector. As your business is, without the people, this is a people's business. How are you going to grow? Are you able to go through mergers and acquisitions to grow that way? Grow organically? No, but if you don't have anyone there to help you grow, well, you've got your challenge right there. Of course, keeping your talent and creating an environment that is motivating, that is inspirational, that gives them purpose also helps to boost the company culture. And it also helps you if you attract and retain the best talent. This is the differential between you and your competition. If you can find them and you can keep them. Now, other companies can copy your strategy, but they cannot copy your culture. And indeed, getting the right talent that are motivated, that are inspired, that have a purpose, that are collaborative, that are skilled, will help your business be innovative. That was also mentioned by the panel earlier. We cannot be in the same place as we were before. We have to continue to challenge ourselves and be innovative with everything that we do, and therefore remain relevant and provide the experiences that our customers expect. So yes, talent acquisition and retention matters more than you might realize in terms of the bigger scope in the world we live in today. Now, it all starts with one thing, which you might not have thought about. It's what we call that talent management framework. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look. If we think about our company, most of us will have a strategy. And it's written down, it's communicated, maybe not, but there is a direction that you have. Now, with having said that, you will also have probably KPIs, key performance indicators. You have your financial ratios. You have your objectives, your actions, your results, your OKRs. That's fantastic. That's the business focus. But how will you get to those outcomes? What will that take? Yes, we're in the people's business, indeed. Right in the heart of our business is our talent. The question that I have for all of you, and I want you to think about where your challenges lie, is when you think about your talent management strategy, take a look at this cycle. This is the broad talent management strategy that you should have in place. Are you planning for the future in terms of your workforce needs? What are those needs? What type of talent do you need? Not just now, but in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. What resources do you require? What skill sets, and therefore which descriptions, do you need to have in place? And where indeed are you attracting that talent from? What are the sources of attraction? What are the channels that you're using? And once you have them, what are you doing to develop and grow them and retain them? And also, what is your succession planning strategy? Now, all of these are critical as part of your overall talent management framework. And I can tell you now, I've been, as I said, a long time in this business and in this sector. This sounds simple. Most organizations just think about, hey, we need to hire someone. We need to, yes, first of all, attract them. Here's your job description. Get on and do it. Now, maybe that's sounds a bit too negative. But trust me, it doesn't matter, the small organizations, some of the largest organizations that have all the resources that they can have are also lacking in many of these areas. We all struggle with this framework, all of us, including our own organization, the one that I work for. We have to constantly look at what we're doing. We need to assess, we need to audit, and we need to think about how we adapt this to the current context that we're facing, and not just today, but also for the future. What I'm going to focus on here for the next 15 minutes is a little bit about attraction and retention. It begins with one area, your EVP, your employee value proposition. Now, again, this might be a new term for some of you. Now, we've heard of customer value propositions also as a business, but it's no different for our employees. If our customers have a value proposition that we are actually offering them something unique, and that's why they should work with us and us with them, why should the employees also choose, or a candidate choose to work with our organizations? What is our value proposition to them? And is it clearly articulated? An example. Let's take some inspiration from some EVPs. What can we learn from other sectors? I'd like you to read this for a moment. So this is Microsoft's employee value proposition. Look at some of the key words. It's a rewarding, it's a diverse, it's an inclusive work environment. And everything that we do helps others to achieve more. That's the external view. Not just about the employee, but if you join us, this is what you can do as a result, the impact that you create. Here's the next one. It's quite long. Take a moment to read this. And of course, it will be translated as you're reading. What stands out for you from this employee value proposition? So here are some things that are highlights. Embrace the innovative technology of tomorrow. Support to help you develop your career. Build relationships. Are you ready to make an impact? It speaks to the candidate. And here's the last one. What resonates with you with this statement from Bain & Company? It's a consulting firm. Well, maybe some of these things. It makes you imagine as a candidate. Picture yourself. It even puts you there in the future. Picture yourself. It's a challenging environment. People that you work with will challenge you. They'll support you and inspire you to be extraordinary. So, while these might be bigger organizations and not in our sector, that's irrelevant. What's important is understanding good or best practice. These organizations have been doing it for decades. They're also challenged, by the way, just so you know, with the war for talent. They are. But they know what their EVP is, and they communicate it powerfully through everything that they do into the marketplace. That's where it begins. So attracting talent starts well before you even have that conversation with the candidate. What does your careers page look like if you have one? If you don't, it doesn't matter how small you are, you can still have something that you can promote in terms of careers at your organization. What types of job descriptions do you have today versus tomorrow? How are you using social media channels to communicate your brand and your employee value proposition? And today, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is even more important, especially to Generation Z, even to millennials. Well, I believe it's important to all of us. It doesn't matter about the generation. And indeed, sustainability has been mentioned as well. Not just for the market, not just for our clients with the events that we do and the conferences, but also to the importance of sustainability as what we do as an organization, what you do as an organization, which really gives meaning and that we're making a difference. And that's what employees more and more are looking for as well in terms of your sustainable practices as a company. And is it all about the money? This is what a lot of you are really challenged with, right? The competition. Well, what's the talent formula for success when it comes to that? Is it all about the money? Money is short term. You can keep increasing your compensation by 5, and I've been there, I know. I've had to do this over the years. By 5, 10, 15, 20%. Because somebody else will always offer more. Always remember this. No matter what you offer, somebody will always offer more. That will not change. That has been the case over 25 years of my experience. The differentiator will be what we will talk about soon. Is about the experience and the environment that you create. As long as there is, of course, a total rewards package that is fair. That is fair. What fair means, whatever that might mean within the industry, within the sector, and against the competition that we're in. If we start comparing ourselves to pharmaceutical sectors, technology sectors like a Samsung or whoever, we can't compete, and we know that. Are you going to change that? Not necessarily. So the question is, what can you control versus what you can't control? That's what we have to focus on, is the controllables, not the non-controllables. So total rewards is a concept we'll just talk about in a moment. Plus employee experience. We'll talk about that in just a moment. If you put these two together, that's what matters. Total rewards plus employee experience is what matters, is the formula. If we look at the total reward strategy, what does that mean? Now, most of you are familiar with this. Maybe you didn't realize it was called total reward strategy. It's also important about how you communicate that strategy, right? So, of course, it's not just about the money, which is key as long as it's fair. It's also about the non-monetary incentives. Beyond compensation, what are those benefits? Are they clearly articulated? Well-being is more and more important than ever before. Development, especially for younger people, is more and more important in terms of their growth and their relevance and reskilling and upskilling and recognition for great work. How do you recognize and incentivize your talent? Because they are really working hard, extremely hard, even to the point of burnout, which is where well-being comes in. Now, the current research shows 63% of respondents would choose a job with a better work-life balance over better pay. Granted, this is not for the Korean market, but think about it for a moment. Would your employees or your candidates think about a better work-life balance being more important than just the pay? And how about this one? 52% of workers would take a pay cut of 5% or more to have the flexibility to work wherever they want. Again, might be different or maybe not for your own business, for your own environment. But again, think about what candidates are thinking about. So key strategies for talent acquisition. Think about where you're hiring. What are your sources? Are you partnering with educational institutions? Are you visible in the marketplace? What is your hiring process like? Are you using the latest technologies to help you through that process and assessments and personality tests and so on? Are you offering, indeed, equal and competitive benefits as much as you can be based on your business and the sector that we're in? And indeed, I think what is absolutely critical, how are you communicating your brand? But you cannot communicate your brand if you don't have it defined with a clear EVP. Now, when we go from attraction to retention, again, this is about environment. Once you have them, remember I talked about the cost of losing them. It could be at least an annual salary to replace that person, or up to, if they're a senior person, up to 2 times their annual salary. Think about how many people you've just lost, for example, the attrition rate in the last 1 or 2 years, and then put a value to that. So this is where retention becomes, it's harder and more costly to lose talent than it is just to get them. Once you have them, how do you keep them? And it's all those things that you see on the screen, from growth, work-life balance, belonging, culture, and employee experience overall is the overarching focus as a strategy. Employee experience. Retention is influenced by the experience that they have in your workplace. So coming back to what can you control versus what you can't control. Remember this model here. That's the talent management strategy and framework. And employee experience sits within the heart of that. Everything, once you've attracted them and you have them, when it comes to how do you develop them? How do you motivate them? What kind of relationship do you as managers, for example, have with your team? How transparent is communications? All of that is about the employee experience. What challenges do they have? Are their goals clear? Do you support them achieve that? How do you inspire them? Now, some of this sounds very soft, not very strategic. Well, actually, you'll be surprised. All of that matters. All of that matters. So, employee experience is influenced by changing consumer habits as well. The way in which we buy products and services has influenced the expectations of employees, especially the younger generation. How are you connecting with them in terms of the technologies that you use? How are you personalizing? So, the power of personalization has become probably the biggest trend in the last 1 or 2 years, if not 3 or 4 years. Starbucks, Spotify, Coca-Cola. Every organization is looking at how to customize the experience of the customer as well as the employee. So that whatever motivational triggers, do you know what motivates your staff? Because it won't be the same for all of them. Do you understand the motivational triggers? Because if you do, how can we then personalize that experience so that they will feel more connected to the business and towards the customer? How inclusive is our workforce, our environment? Because if it is not, then they will feel less valued in terms of what they're bringing to the table. And indeed, it's not just work-life balance, it's the work-life wellness, it's work-life integration. With the world that we are in today with hybrid and remote work, this is becoming even harder to try and find that balance between the psychological, that mental, and the physical state of being. How is we as organizations impacting the work-life wellness of our employees? What's our strategy behind that? So these are areas as well to consider. That employee experience formula, there is one as well. If we want to boost employee experience, I think my company is a great place to work. Then we have to think about engagement. How do we motivate, which I mentioned earlier? Do we understand the goals? How do we recognize our teams, our people? How do we enable them? Do they have the right tools and the resources and the support to grow? And indeed, if they are empowered, then they're more likely to say, I feel great working here. This is a great place to work. So I won't go through all of these, but you have this in your books right there. All the details are there because there's a lot of things in terms of what you can be doing. Now, you'll say many of these things, oh, yes, I've seen before. That's okay. But the question is, which is your focus areas? Because it might be different for each one of you. Where are you strong? Where do you need to boost that focus and that attention? Is it about reward? Is it about recognition? Is it about pay equality? Is it about development? Think about that. So, indeed, if we think about, as we conclude, here's some steps that you can think about. Reflect and audit your current practices. What can you control versus what you can't? When it comes to what you can control, where's your greatest weakness? And what can you do to change that? If you think about the second part, think about current good practices. What are other, not just the MICE industry, but what are other sectors doing? Do your research. Just like I showed you 2 or 3 examples of an employee value proposition. Even if today you walk away saying, wait a minute, what is our company's employee value proposition? If the answer is, I don't know, or I can't articulate that easily, then that's a good place to start. And third, invest in your team. I hear people often saying, well, if I train them, they'll probably leave. So what's the point? But if you don't train them and they stay, what is the impact in terms of the customer experience, in terms of the experience of their team members, and in terms of your business? Yes, indeed. There's no such thing as the future is out there. It's already here. And that employee experience is rapidly changing. As I said, it's even harder for us as businesses to adapt, but it's not impossible. And that's why adaptability is probably the number one thing to focus on as a MICE industry. We talk about the marketplace, talk a lot about business. But Douglas Conant, the former CEO of Campbell's Soups, said it best. If we want to win in the marketplace, we must first win in the workplace. Thank you.